Great Wednesday. Welcome to the Fully Human Connections podcast. I'm your host, King. I'm joined by my co-host, Reggie. How you doing today, Reggie?
Doing well, King. Feeling good. Feeling a little bit upset by what I heard during a speech last night in Congress, but it was nothing that surprised me. But my energy is good. To answer the question before you ask it, I'm operating at a 10 in terms of spiritual energy, and I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. Well, I join you as a 10. Got a chance to get outside and get a walk in this morning. Woke up fully engaged and feeling in line and feel like I'm vibrating on the frequency of love, energy, and my purpose. So I'm excited to be in that space and have clarity of purpose. So I'm a 10 as well. So what's your gratitude moment?
Yeah, so I mean, my standard gratitude remains. I'm grateful to have a roof over my head, have indoor plumbing and safe drinking water, electricity that runs a refrigerator with relatively fresh food in it, and access to more food when I need it without much of a problem. So those are the basic things that I don't take for granted, and I'm really grateful for. Added to that, as far as I can tell, still have a relatively sound mind and body. I have good friends. I have work that invigorates me, that I care about. The only way I could, make that work any better is to get paid more for doing it. But I'm grateful for all of that. Some very, very basic things. How about you?
Again, I'm grateful for my standard as well: life, health, my ability to hear, see, walk, talk, stand, breathe, and have a sound mind. Grateful for another 24 hours to pursue my purpose in life. A mother who's alive and still has love, energy, and even though dealing with her transitioning and getting close to that day, but still grateful that she's alive and present today. I'm grateful for a roof over my head, and grateful for just, again, being able to wake up and just have a grateful spirit and not letting the news, the media, these circumstances, the insanity that's happening in the world right now have a chip away from my feeling of gratitude and my 10. So I'm grateful for those things.
Amen.
So with that being said, why don't you walk us into our topic for today?
Yeah, so as we've been doing for the past, I think, month or 5 weeks now, we've been speaking about practical applications of my 2020 book, Enough with the Talking Points, Doing More Good Than Harm in Conversation, which just became available at the end of February as an audio book as well. It was just in print since 2020. Now it's as an audio book as well. A little plug there for the author. But we announced we were going to speak about Enough with the Talking Points and avoiding generalizations and insults and assumptions with related to gender and sexual stereotypes. That was what we announced. But because the president of the United States made a speech in front of Congress last night, his first speech of this term, there were too many examples of talking points that are effectively either meaningless as spoken from arguably the most powerful man in the world in terms of his office, or outright lies. And I think it would be well worth our while to, take a look at just some of that language, because if I was going to rewrite the book and take some quotes as examples of what we're speaking about not doing in conversation, and not just political conversation. I mean, the book applies to if you're having a problem with your spouse or your kids or your parents, colleagues at work, whatever. I mean, what the book does is talks about what to try to do and what to try to avoid. So it's not just in the political realm, but because the political realm is, as you said, the kind of the insanity. That's not how you didn't say insanity, but the craziness of the world right now. I thought it might be worthwhile just to say a few of these things out loud and then talk about why they're, in fact, they're talking points and they do harm, either because they're misleading, they're outright false, or because they're really not factual in any way. They're just characterizations or generalizations. So I'm going to just read a couple of pieces of that, and then we can come back and unpack them. So he attacked the former president, which presidents typically don't do in this country. Quote, under Joe Biden, the worst president in American history, there were hundreds of thousands of illegal crossings a month, and virtually all of them, including murderers, drug dealers, gang members, and people from mental institutions and insane asylums, were released into our country. So that's one example. Worst president of the United States in American history. That's a sweeping generalization that's not grounded in any fact. And then people from mental institutions, drug dealers, gang members, murderers, and people from insane asylums were released into the country. This is language quoted from the President of the United States. A couple of more examples. I terminated the ridiculous Green New Scam. I withdrew from the unfair Paris Climate Accord. I withdrew from the corrupt World Health Organization. And I also withdrew from the anti-American UN Human Rights Council. Just a couple of comments on there before we get into it. The unfair Paris Climate Accord, which is the agreement among nations to try to save the planet. He just says it's unfair, but he doesn't say why it's unfair, other than it was costing us money. The corrupt World Health Organization. He provides no evidence that the World Health Organization, relied on by virtually every country on the planet, is corrupt. And the anti-American UN Human Rights Council provided no evidence, and I don't know of any evidence that the UN Human Rights Council is against America. It may turn that way now, but it's not there. So let me just stop there. I can come back and read more of these if I want. But this is the human being with arguably the largest platform, the largest pulpit on the planet, President of the United States, saying things that are generalizations, assumptions, provably false, and or unfair characterizations without any evidence. That's what we argue against doing in any conversation. Again, whether it's with your kids, with your parents, with your next door neighbor, these generalizations, unfounded judgments and characterizations and insults. The worst, Joe Biden was the worst president in American history. Why say that? In fact, there's plenty of evidence to back up in terms of the infrastructure bill, in terms of a lot of things that Biden did, that he by far was not the worst president. So I'll pause there. And I know you said at the beginning, you got up and you had good energy today, regardless of all the craziness out there, that I'm bringing the craziness into our conversation. But it's spot on related to what we are talking about today in terms of doing more good than harm in conversation.
Well, I think that's another great topic again, definitely something that's obviously current and that's a pain point for a lot of people. But, I think that I have a perspective in three areas. Mm-hmm. Number one, I'll say this, that I believe our cultural givens plays a huge role in how we look at what's happening right now. Mm-hmm. Just because of the fact is, and I'm not going to try to speak for all Black people, but for my folks that I know and talk to and read and understand where people are right now. And then same thing with Native Americans. It's kind of like what we're seeing is not something that's shocking. Maybe it's definitely it's upsetting. Definitely it's not something that's wanted, but it's not something that's not fathomable to us. It's something that is always there, and now we get a chance to just see it happening. It's been done throughout history, and I get more into that. But my second point would be also understanding that as the engineer in me and really beginning to look at things from identification of being fully human and not taking things personal and seeing the chess game that's the game being played, that I expect Trump to do what he's doing
Mm-hmm.
because he really has no choice. I mean, other than that, he would have to answer the questions of what he's doing to the country, to the economy, and everything that he's doing is not bringing any kind of making America great again at all. The stock market is dropping. People getting laid off. That's going to have an impact on the economy soon when more and more people are going to be spending less and require more unemployment. That's going to have a negative impact on the economy. The tariffs is impacting Wall Street. So uh, he has to come in and lie. He has to come in and give his base things that will appease them, which is, look what I've done to help you feel better about yourselves because we were losing this country. So I got rid of DEI, got rid of that, so that's gone. So that you can cheer for that. That's gone. And not only is it gone in America as far as the federal government, but it's also corporations have also agreed that no more DEI. We've gotten rid of woke, as he stated. So all those Republican talking points that they have been espousing for the last 2 or 3 years just came out, just hammered those and said, those are my victories. This is what I've done. I mean, you look at the fact that he has not passed, the Republicans are going to control the House, the Senate, and the executive office, has not passed any laws at all. Everything's coming through his executive orders. And that's just right there is ridiculous in the context that you only have to go there. I'm kind of glad he is going that route because since they're not laws, the next administration, if it's Democrat, can, we don't have to hear another executive orders can change those. So kind of glad they're not going through the process of the Senate and the Congress. I mean, the full Congress and creating laws because it'd be more difficult to kind of undo what he's doing if that's the plan, if that's what happens. So yeah, that's my initial comments. And then my third thing is also having to be able to remove yourself from what he's doing because it's going to get worse. And see, I know that. I mean, I expect it. I know it. It's definitely going to get a lot worse before it gets better. And I just want to, and I'll pick back up on this more in depth on the other side, but I highly recommend folks, if they haven't seen it, they're definitely watch it now. I'm late to the party, so a lot of people may have seen it. It's a movie series that came out in 2021. It's called Dope Sick, and talks about the whole uh, Purdue Pharma and the OxyContin, how they brought that to the market. And when you really watch that series, it really helps you understand how what Trump is doing and how people who really benefit from what he's doing, how they think. Because we keep looking at it from our perspective of the folks who are basically middle income, blue collar, you know, perspective where you are working your butt off to not just survive but thrive a little. If you got some extra money to invest and you have a house you want, then you're happy. You're pretty much satisfied for the most part with your financial and career success. So people who are kind of in that space, maybe 6 figures a year, high fives, you're comfortable and you're looking at it from your perspective. But you're looking at it from somebody who wants to truly control people and don't care about, look at people lives as just really being casualties of war, literally in their minds. Like, well, just some people are gonna die, and that's just what it is. I mean, there's scenes where they say when they're accused of their drug being addictive, and their response was, well, we're gonna blame the abusers and say it's the abusers' fault. It's not our drug. So my point is the same thing with Trump is doing, saying, okay, well, yeah, I know we fired some folks from the FAA. No, that he's not that he's saying this verbally, but this is the process of what he's done. We fired the head of the FAA and got rid of a lot of folks who work in the towers, but it was because they were DEI and it was their fault, the planes. So it's the same thing. It's like just blame who you give people someone to hate and they'll focus their energy there. And then you can just do what you're going to do behind, directly, not behind, but really in plain sight. What the Sackler family was doing with OxyContin was directly in plain sight. And what Trump is doing right now is in plain sight. And you just see that pattern repeating itself. So all that to say is those are the reasons why I'm not really upset, because I see it's going to happen. And I'm more upset mainly not by what he's doing, but if I am upset, I should say, it's more about the lack of strategy of how do we respond and what is our way of dealing with what's going on. So that's where I would say if I have any negative energy or anger, it would be more in that space than it would be at Trump, because I expect him to do what he's going to do.
Yeah, yeah. I love that you brought up the Sackler family, because in Healing America's Narratives, I actually wrote about that whole process. And where I'm sitting now, I'm about an hour away from where their headquarters used to be in Stamford, Connecticut. So that's a kind of a local, even though it's a national story, it was had a local beginning for us in Connecticut and the greater New York area. But I wanted to just pick up on a couple of things that you said. One is the getting rid of DEI, and the language around that. In my newsletter, my Substack newsletter and podcast, which comes out every Wednesday morning now, that's actually what I wrote about, using DEI and all of the noise around it. Getting rid of it. That's what I mean by noise. As a smokescreen to hide something. And what they're doing with DEI and woke and critical race theory and all the other charged language that conservatives don't like, and virtually nobody actually ever defines when they criticize it. And I think most of them really don't know what they're criticizing. They're just criticizing what they've been told to criticize. I'll give an example of that. But what's going on under the surface, when everybody's saying, "Yeah, get rid of DEI, fire General Brown, and you fire the women. They're pro DEI. The military shouldn't be woke," and all that. And that's a real problem. So I'm not in any way minimizing what's happening. But that's red meat for the MAGA crowd. That's red meat for the Trump people. They love to see that stuff. Yeah, we got rid of DEI. We fired a black general. We fired women leaders in the military. But what's happening below the surface, but still in plain sight, is everything that you just said and everything that I'm about to say is hiding, especially if you're not paying attention, a gradual dismantling of democratic process in the United States and a move toward autocracy. That move is well on its way. It's not like it could happen in 2 years. It's well on its way. And some background on that, which I think is really important. One of the prime historical qualities of autocratic leaders anywhere, take Russia, take China, take the former autocratic Balkan states and Eastern Bloc countries prior to the late 1980s and early 1990s when the Soviet Union fell. There were a couple of trends, even going back to Hitler and Mussolini, leading up to World War II. Among the strategies and concepts that inform an autocracy, a big one is controlling the narrative. And Trump and Vance and Johnson and Hegseth and the rest of them are really good at that. Many people believe everything that they say is true. So DEI is bad, woke is bad, critical race theory is bad. If you ask most of them what critical race theory is, they couldn't tell you. Intersectionality is bad. Most of them couldn't tell you what that is either. But they've won the narrative war. They're good at it and they've won it. And it's not true. So that's one piece of an autocracy. Another piece of autocracy is controlling all the branches of government, the legislative, the executive, which they have right now, and they have a significant majority on the Supreme Court. Now, I want to put an asterisk there, because right before you and I got on this show, the Supreme Court overruled a U.S. appeals court and said that Donald Trump cannot stop USAID from sending funds that were already earmarked to help other countries. So the United States Supreme Court actually made an anti-Trump ruling. First time they've done that in definitely a year, maybe years. And Chief Justice John Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett, she's one of Trump's appointees, one of his 3 appointees, voted with the majority. So they're basically saying you can't stop that aid. Now, so we might see a conflict between will the president of the United States, who thought he had the Supreme Court in his pocket, will he honor their decision or will he ignore them? Because that's what autocrats do. They own the courts. The courts rule against them. They get rid of the justices, which fortunately he really can't do here. But so control the narrative, control the legislature, control the courts, control the media. Trump has already sued ABC and CBS. I believe those are the 2 he has sued, and both of whom have settled with him rather than go to court against him. And he's prevented the Associated Press from being in the Oval Office to attend the daily presidential briefings in the press room. So he's beginning to try to control the media, and he's received millions of dollars from, unfortunately, where a lot of people get their news, social media. Musk, what's his name from Meta? I always forget his name.
Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah, it ends in Berg. And then, the Google guy and the Apple guy. And, so he already they were all on the platform with him at the inauguration. So the noise around getting rid of DEI, and we should protest against that, because getting rid of DEI is a protest against all of the progress made, I could say, since the Civil War, or I could say since the 64, 65 Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act. But that's gradually being rolled back. And last thing I'm going to say, because I'm putting a lot of information out here, and I know that all of this, especially the anti-DEI, anti-woke, anti-intersectionality language, all of that is the foundational language of the mandate for leadership, the conservative promise, which is, everybody knows, is Project 2025. Now, it's 900 some odd pages long. I haven't read the whole thing, but I've read enough of it that they make 4 promises to Americans, what they're going to do, and then they expand on those promises. And in almost every paragraph, they talk about getting rid of woke, and they put adjectives in front of them. I don't have it memorized. They put an adjective in front of critical race theory, really just desecrating it. And they criticize intersectionality. So remember that Donald Trump, when all the noise around Project 2025 started coming out 2 years ago, give or take, it was published in 2023. The media didn't catch it until 2024. You and I spoke about it before the mainstream media did, because we're so smart and lucky. And Trump, when confronted with that, said he'd never heard of it. He didn't know what it is. The Trump administration is executing Project 2025 point by point. If you read the document, just read the introductory part where it gives you the general outline. Trump doesn't have an ideology other than wanting to be the ruler of the world and win a Nobel Prize. He got enough money from the Heritage Foundation and the Christian Right to fund his 2016 campaign and his 2020 and 2024 campaigns. He's executing their agenda. And anybody who can read the news and read Project 2025 can see that for themselves. That's what's being done right now. And what the people in the Christian right may or may not like, he's moving towards an autocracy. Now, people like an autocracy when it's their guy in charge. But if he does something that they disagree with, they have lost their voices. So it's a real dangerous deal that's going on right now. But any American who's interested in democracy and this country and in the alliances with Europe and Canada and Japan that have existed post-World War II and that have opposed Russia, which was then the Soviet Union, post-World War II, anyone who genuinely cares about that needs to read Project 2025 and watch what the Trump administration is doing, because the Trump administration is brilliant at controlling the narrative. Right? They do harm in conversation because they say things that are false as though they're true, and they point to things that are true and say they're false. And that's how every fascist, Nazi, totalitarian dictatorship in history has operated. None of this is new. What they did to the president of Ukraine in the Oval Office, that was staged. It was obvious that it was staged. And it's not moving anyone towards democracy. It's befriending our primary enemy, Vladimir Putin. So this whole narrative is shifting. And unfortunately, I'm going to stop in 30 seconds here. There are tens of millions of Americans, maybe over 100 million Americans, I don't know the numbers, who are either ignorant, arrogant, or naive, or not well enough read to believe everything that comes out of Donald Trump's, Pete Hegseth's, Pam Bondi's, Mike Johnson's, and J.D. Vance's mouth. And they're spewing things that are not true. And occasionally they'll say something that's true. I mean, to use the old cliche, a broken clock is right twice a day. But it's a real dangerous time. Yesterday, 73% of the French people said they no longer consider the United States to be an ally. Now, Trump will say, who cares about France? And he means that. My friends in Canada, I have a lot of them, understand who I am and understand that tens of millions of Americans disagree with Trump and tariffs and Trump saying 51st state stuff, but they're going to take care of their country. So he's making the world and the United States a much less safe place across a number of issues. And Americans, many Americans, seem okay with that. And that's exactly how democracies have failed in South America, in Eastern Europe, in Southeast Asia since World War II, when they failed. And we're not exceptional. That can happen here. It's happening right now. And controlling the narrative is a big part of it. And as last thing I'll say is, as you said, the disjointed, ununified response on the part of the Democratic Party is embarrassingly inept. There are some great individual voices speaking up. Al Green, from the state of Texas, stood up in the first 2 minutes, waving his cane and yelling at Donald Trump, "You don't have a mandate to hurt Medicaid." And he was ordered to sit down. He didn't, and they escorted him out. A few others stood up with signs on their backs. A few others held up little signs. Women wore pink to protest. Some didn't attend, but it was a really disjointed Democratic response. And I think that the woman from, I forget if she's from Michigan, her name is Slotkin, who provided the formal official Democratic response, did a pretty good job, kept it short, and what she had to say seemed focused. But as a party, the Democrats are in disarray. They have no governing power in Congress, but they have no real leadership to get behind right now, and they need to fix that. So I apologize for that rant, but I'll stop now.
All right, well, this is a good section for us to take a break for our sponsor, and then we'll pick back up with the conversation on the other side.
Yeah.
So
the playbook for growing a local business online is simple. Capture new leads, conversationally convert those leads into sales, turn those customers into positive reviews, and then reactivate those customers into repeat buyers. And that's exactly what our platform does. In order to consistently generate new leads, you first need to be found. The quickest way to get search engines like Google to put your business at the top of search results is by having a steady flow of positive reviews. With our platform, you can show up in search and stand apart from your local competition by easily collecting new customer reviews through text. But getting found is only the beginning. Most consumers choose the first business that responds to them. So unless you start conversations with potential customers almost instantly, they'll go somewhere else. That's why we make starting conversations with website visitors as easy as clicking a button, connecting you instantly through text message so the conversation doesn't end when they leave your website. And we bring all your leads, no matter where they come from, into a single conversation stream that supports text, email, video messaging, Google Business Chats, and even Facebook and Instagram DMs, so you can respond faster and more efficiently than ever. When it comes to turning all those conversations into customers, we make collecting payments just another convenient part of the combo, so you get paid faster no matter how they prefer to pay. Next, you'll want to turn your new customers into happy reviews, which is a snap with our new review request quick actions. The more conversations and customers you generate, the easier it becomes to drive repeat business. We make reactivating contacts into customers as easy as, yup, you guessed it, the push of a button. With bulk actions, you can send out text and email campaigns to generate new sales whenever you have a new update, promotion, or story to tell. We make modern online marketing simple. Let's start growing your business today.
yeah, so we're back. Thank you all for being with us and listening to the Fully Human Connections podcast today. That was our sponsor, King Connections. So thank you for our sponsor for that. So piggybacking on what you said, Reggie, I just wanted to kind of chime in on just the power of miscommunication and branding that has happened in our country. For example, I'm going to give some statistics to back up what I'm going to say, but we've been branded, DI has been branded Black people, or Black people primarily. When people think about DEI, they think about Black people. Then you think about gays, and you may think about Hispanics as well. But Black people is usually the person who's most people think comes to mind when you talk about DEI, and that it's Black people are benefiting from it, and getting rid of the programming or initiatives affected more Black people than anybody else. But I'm just going to read some statistics so that folks can understand. Again, it goes back to the mismarketing and the branding. So 63% of all DI leadership roles were held by white women, 63%. So right there to let you know that blacks didn't benefit from DEI initiatives on any grand scale at all. So then you look at things such as DEI chief diversity officers, 76% are white. So 76% of chief diversity officers for DEI initiatives were white, where blacks comprised less than 8% of these roles. So when you really look at only blacks benefited, about 22% of blacks benefited from any DEI initiatives, and most were initiatives aimed at things like Women's History Month, Black History Month, programs around that, but no real substantive employment of putting blacks in leadership roles. Same thing with affirmative action. That's also something that was branded for, again, black people, thinking that black people benefited the most, and it was designed to uplift black people. And again, white women were the greater beneficiaries of affirmative action. Same thing when it comes to government contracting. When you say 8A government contracting, you get white women are the most beneficiaries of those as well. So what's interesting is how they're able to brand that to black people without the black people actually getting the benefits of it. So even though they got rid of these programs, it doesn't really impact black people at all because we didn't really benefit from most of those programs. And I mention that because they're able to achieve both goals. They're able to create the black boogeyman, and then when the programs are created, the blacks still don't benefit from it. What's interesting to me, though, what I really find to be interesting once you really begin to do critical thinking and get away from listening to a lot of the narrative they feed you, I never see white women come out and argue against in these programs, even though they're the greater beneficiary of these programs. I've never, now again, if I'm wrong, I would love for someone to definitely show me some data, video clips, women's groups arguing for any of these initiatives, protesting to keep them active. I never see that. So only blacks are the ones out there arguing about making more DI initiatives. So I even have to question our leadership. Because again, this is not something I had to do deep research on. You can just literally go to Google and say, which marginalized group benefited mostly from DEI? And you see those alarming statistics right there. So that's on the first page. So it's not even hidden. That's where I'm going with this. But people are led astray from both sides. Trump, and I give him credit for this, he brilliantly is able to tap into the zeitgeist by pointing out things that people know or people understand that this how things work. For example, now with the federal government, that has been the greater best pathway for blacks to move from poor to middle class was working with the federal government. The cultural gifting that was given to us coming up, because my mother worked for the federal government, was get a good government job and build your career with the government. And that's was the goal by most people who were baby boomers, and the baby boomers teaching that to their Generation X children. And then I also know a lot of people that I've talked to, several people lately, and we've had these conversations prior to Trump getting in office and making these things, that ever since COVID, I know a lot of folks who work from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. I'm not going to say their names, so I'm just making this point that they haven't gone back to the office since COVID. They've been able to work from home since COVID. Another friend of mine told me his wife, as well as her sisters, say that they get on 2 Zoom meetings a week, and that's the work they do, and they get paid $126,000 at GS-13s. So a lot of these GS-13s, mid-level managers haven't really been working hard at all. Now, did they deserve to be fired the same day by email? No. But my point is, Trump was able to, like he said with fake media, it's been known for years, decades now, that the media has not been forthright and honest and biased and all those things. And again, manufacturing consent, as Noam Chomsky says, I mentioned last week. So when Trump comes out and says fake media, people say, yeah, that's true. That's fake media. But then he's saying it from a context of it's only fake when the story's about him, then it's fake. So my point is, without critical thinking, people just buy into all these false narratives and they get riled up and they put energy behind things that don't really even benefit themselves. And then the worst part about it is how shocking it is to see folks who are willing to vote. And this is where I believe white supremacy and racism comes into play. I really believe that majority of MAGA people who are on the poor side, who are not benefiting from the tax cuts and all the things that the 1% are getting, but the ones who vote for Trump because they believe that he was going to make all the other people suffer. And some of them are being shocked that, okay, they're being hit as well. They're getting fired. Farmers are being subsidies and agricultural grants and things are being cut off funding for them. So now they're starting to protest a little bit. But I still believe that if you look at the fact that 75 million people voted for Donald Trump this time, 70, that's an alarming number. That's 70. So it's not some just fringe 15, 20 people. 20 million people, 75 million. So you figure how many of those 75 million people make up the number of folks who just have hatred and vitriol for anybody that's not white and voted strictly on racial lines. How many people voted for that? And I believe what's shocking is that they're willing to take losses as long as the other minority groups don't benefit. And that's what's shocking. It's like I still see them defending Trump in the feeds. If you click on some of those videos on YouTube and you watch Rachel Maddow on MSNBC or CNN analysts talk about last night's speech or what Elon is doing and how many people have been laid off and the tariffs, and everybody is clear to see that if you don't even have to be biased to look at the fact of how negatively impacting the country he is doing. They will still have the mega folks in those threads that will still defend what Trump is doing as patriotic. I've seen even black people still defend him as being patriotic, as being a liberator, as making America great again. And all I can say is and I know your whole premise and your book is don't make labels. I can't see anything other than the label of stupid for these individuals. And I'm not saying it from a judgment context. I'm talking about from the definition that Carlos, I believe the Italian economist Carlos Zapata, I'm forgetting his name right now, what he defined as stupid people, folks who will vote against their own interests just for the demise of who they perceive to be their enemies. So that's kind of where I know I've said a lot of things, but that to me is these false narratives and people are just believing things because whether it's the left media, CNN, MSNBC, just constantly feeding you, or deliberate Fox who just deliberately gives you lies and hate to keep their people fueled. At the end of the day, both are looking for clicks, both are looking for views. And that's why I say we don't see a true response from the so-called left. It's like leadership is sitting around trying. I even heard Hakeem Jeffries even say, what you wanted me to do? What can we do? He even came out of his mouth and said it on camera. And that to me shows he has there is no justification for him to be as the House minority leader at all. He's no leader. For him to say that and not have a plan and not even see this coming, or now that it's here, not understand how best to maneuver if majority of people in this country really are not racist and they really are about justice for everybody and they just really wanted cheaper egg prices. If those people really felt that way, which I don't believe, to be honest, but there are people who really fit in that category, then they should be easily able to get across, reach and get connected with those individuals, get engaged, and make sure that they lay out to the folks, here's what our strategy is for dealing with Trump and Elon. And for them now, still, here we are in March, never have not stated to this point what a plan is, how we should prepare. It's just really disheartening.
Yeah.
I know I say a lot there.
No, we both do that. We have the same disease. So I want to introduce the other word. I mean, you mentioned, the side. If you vote against your own interest, somebody says that that's stupid, and I always come back to, Justice David Souter's warning. Not that he was the only one who ever said something like this, but I've referred to it many, many times. He was speaking at the University of New Hampshire Law School in 2012, and I think the primary talk, it's an hour and 20 minutes, was on education. But there was one piece in which I forget what somebody asked him a question, and his response was that the thing that worried him most at night wasn't a foreign invasion with the military or this or that or the other thing, but it was the pervasive civic ignorance of U.S. citizens. So they didn't really understand how their government works. And he said democracy can't survive too much ignorance. Right? And then he said a lot of other things. You can find that, there's a 7-minute clip on YouTube. Everybody wants to listen to that. You can also find the whole talk he gave, but that piece is a 7-minute clip. And in fact, first of all, it's a complex world, and it's a complex country. So I don't deny it. I don't make believe I understand everything that goes on, but I get up every day with the intention of understanding as much as I can. And I think that intention is the big thing. But in surveys, and I forget the percentages now, but it's more than a quarter. It could be more than half. But people in America couldn't define the 3 branches of the federal government. They couldn't tell you they couldn't name what the 2 houses of Congress are, and they couldn't discern what the executive, legislative, and judicial branches do. Never mind being able to name them. They didn't know how they operated and who did what. And they didn't understand that on state and local levels either, where the governor is kind of like the president, or the mayor. The mayor, the governor, and the president are the chief executive officers, that type of stuff. So with the complexity of foreign affairs, with the complexity of diversity, equity, and inclusion in this country, with the complexity of our history, and the trajectory toward a more perfect union, this ignorance of history, which is really dangerous. I would put ignorance above stupidity in terms of what's really at cause here. Because a lot of people who didn't pay attention in school, and then through no fault of their own, didn't have the luxury of college and went out and got a job right away. And let me put an asterisk there. There are many people who went to college, who went to graduate school, and walk around with PhDs or JDs after their name. And they're as much a part of the problem as anybody who only has a high school education. So I'm not saying getting a degree makes you better. I'm definitely not saying that. Because, J.D. Vance has a law degree from Yale, and he supports everything that Trump says. And he attacked the foreign president on national TV in the Oval Office. But this ignorance of what's really happening and how the country works, and how it came to be that the grocery store has food in it, and that you can get a good job if you work hard, and that the trajectory after the Civil War wasn't magical, because as we know, it was, just to stay with the race issue for a second, and the DEI in a larger perspective. We're faced with a failed Reconstruction after Lincoln got shot and Andrew Johnson took over, allowing all of the Confederates to take over the state houses in the former Confederate states. We had from 1870 through 1950, over 6,000 African Americans were lynched, mainly in the former Confederate States, but not only there. Jim Crow laws, Black Code laws, all the things that you and I know about. But it was bad enough that in 1964 and 65, others had to protest, take to the streets, and first educate and then force Lyndon Johnson, who did a really good job with this part, to push through the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act in 64, 65. People forget that many Southern Congress people left the Democratic Party because of that and went to the Republican Party, which became the party of discrimination and not giving people, equal rights. To this day, they remain there. A lot of people don't like that, but look at the votes, look at the statistics, look at the different states and how they vote. It's there. Sorry. But it's this ignorance of how things work, as David Souter warned us about, and it's this arrogance about, and as you were saying, of this unhealthy us versus them. Oh, if the Black people can vote and run for office, then they might do bad things to me because I'm white. I mean, that's an oversimplified way to say it, but it's not inaccurate in many cases. I mean, I also want to throw on the table with DEI is that, and I like the statistics you shared, but DEI was designed to continue to help all women as well, because if you look at corporate structures and any place there's power in this country, whether you're Black, white, green, blue, or yellow, women still are fighting for equality. And I don't say that to oppose what you said about the white women in charge of a lot of these efforts, but just to remember that, former enslaved men got the right to vote. Let me get I think it's close to 90 years before all women got the right to vote. I forget the exact numbers. It might not be 90, it might be 50 something. I'm losing the dates in my mind. So, it's this ongoing process. And the scary thing for me, as a second generation Italian American, which most people would say white guy, but I like what Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote, that, I'm not one of those people who thinks I'm white. I'm a second generation Italian American, and my grandparents were not treated as white when they came to Ellis Island. They weren't treated as poorly as slaves and the descendants of slaves were treated. By no means was it even close to that. But we continue to make progress. And what's going on now is a dismantling of that process by a mix of people, primarily white men, but a lot of white women supported as well. And there's a handful of people of color who I don't know what they're thinking as well. But it's this, and as a poet and a writer, like I get offended by the abuse of language, the misuse of language. I mean, for me, it's like a personal thing, whether it's directed at me or somebody else, I don't even give a shit. And that's what's going on now. Words don't matter because everything can be said. There's no respect. It's a post-truth world, as many people have said. And in fact, in terms of the narratives espoused by people, that's true. It is a post-truth world, but there is still truth. It's just not known by a lot of people. And nobody has a monopoly on it. And it requires critical thinking, investigative reporting, and there still are good investigative reporters out there. But the uneducated, and again, let me just say that differently, the ignorant American citizen can't discern the difference between an investigative journalist and a talking head commentator on the news. And I don't care if it's Fox, MSNBC, Newsmax, America First. I don't care what the platform is. There's a difference between a journalist and a talking head commentator, a paid celebrity commentator. And that's where the ignorance comes in again. People don't discern the difference or can't discern the difference. And that's another way that democracy gets dismantled, because you're exhausted by trying to figure out what's true and what's not. So you give up. And so my request of anybody who cares about democracy in the real sense of that word is get a good night's sleep and don't give up. What else are you besides tired, to quote one of my coaching instructors? We were in this really rigorous, and at times rigid coach training program, and people were exhausted. I mean, it's really intense, long days. And how is everyone? We're tired. What else are you besides tired? Is what they used to say. What they said, could be applied to boot camp in the military as well. Yeah, you're exhausted. You're worn out. You're being beaten down. What else are you besides exhausted, worn out, and beaten down? What else do you have? And that's the kind of language I want to live in. I'm calling on the depth of what's possible for human beings who are at real risk of losing something very valuable right now in this country, and by association in other countries as well.
I wanted to
my rant.
No problem. I wanted, before we wrap up, I wanted to piggyback on what I was referring to when I said stupid people, that it wasn't a judgment of me saying people are stupid because I'm saying I'm smarter or they're not as intelligent. So what I was referring to is, again, Italian economist Carlo Cipolla. He came up with what he called the laws of stupidity. And he said he broke human behaviors down into 4 groups. He said there's intelligent individuals benefit both themselves and others. Bandits, they benefit only themselves by harming others. They act out their own self-interest. Their motivations are predictable. Unfortunate, the third, these people cause harm while trying to help others. And then the 4th category is stupid. They harm both themselves and others. The stupid people act without any rational explanation. Their decisions are erratic, and often the consequences are more harmful than those of deliberate wrongdoer, because stupidity is unpredictable. A stupid person is more dangerous than a bandit. He argues that stupidity follows predictable patterns and that its effects can be catastrophic for society. He also talks about stupidity is not limited to a race or a gender or income. It exceeds all that. And he gives real quick 5 laws of stupidity so people can understand it's just not passing judgment based on someone's intelligence or lack of understanding. So he says, law number 1, everyone underestimates the number of stupid individuals in circulation. We tend to assume most people are rational, but stupidity is more prevalent than we realize. Law number 2, the probability of a person being stupid is independent of any other characteristic of that person. Stupidity isn't linked to wealth, education, or social status. It's a universal trait. Law number 3, a stupid person is a person who causes losses to another person or to a group of persons while himself deriving no gain and even possibly incurring losses. Stupid people harm others without benefiting themselves. Law number 4, non-stupid people always underestimate the damaging power of stupid individuals. Intelligent people often fail to grasp how unpredictable and harmful stupid people can be, especially those in position of power. And then finally, law number 5, a stupid person is more dangerous than a bandit. While bandits act out of self-interest, stupid people cause harm without any rational explanation, making their actions more dangerous and unpredictable. I just want to really share that because I wanted folks to really understand it's not about labeling people from I'm smarter and these people don't think like me, so they're stupid. It's really critically understanding why people are behaving in this way that looks insane. But once you put that in that kind of context, you realize why people are making these decisions, because they're stupid, and it's not really their fault so much as the media is giving them so much propaganda, so much misinformation, that if you are a person who just are average and you're looking at your phone and responding to notifications, you spend time on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, you're getting your information from those sources. If you're in that kind of space, then more than likely you're going to behave. Your behaviors are going to be stupid one way or the other. Like I said, you're going to be believing things such as, and when I mentioned about DEI, I wasn't saying that from a context that white women didn't deserve to have the progress that they've been made through those programs. I'm just saying that they should be labeled correctly for who they benefit. That's the only point I was making there. And because it's like welfare again, welfare, DEI, and affirmative action. If you were asked most people who comes to mind, if you had to give me an image for each of those programs, it's going to be somebody black. And again, black folks are not the greater recipient of any of those programs. So I just wanted to try to clear that up a little bit, that at the end of the day, what I'm advocating for is that's why you must lose your identity from the context of identifying yourself based on your race or your gender or your sexual orientation or your religion or your career or any of these other societal labels, and see yourself as a human being. And I just wanted to wrap this up by going back to where I was really going to when I mentioned about Purdue Pharma, is that growing up and watching the crack epidemic, my cultural givens, when I heard about opioids, and even people in the black community, when they heard about the damage it was doing, was like, oh, okay, well, white people are suffering now. They didn't really care, because like we suffered and we didn't see help coming to our community, and we were labeled as, well, if they're doing crack, they're just drug offenders and they're drug dealers, and they just demonized our entire community. So laws were enacted and police brutality and all those things were accepted. But when you watch something like Dope Sick and you're a human being and you see folks who I know that probably don't like black people, would be my initial assumption. I could be wrong, but the coal miners and the folks up in those Kentucky and West Virginia areas, and you see them suffering, the human in me felt sorry, felt pain, didn't want to see them go through that. So that's what I mean with transcending that identity of just seeing myself as a black person and staying within my cultural givens perspective, but seeing the humanity of it and coming to tears at just watching how those communities were also damaged and destroyed, and watching this system support capitalism and the corruption doing regardless of the administration. So I just kind of wanted to throw that back in there and mention that was my reason for bringing it up, is the fact that we got to get to the point where we see the humanity in everybody and not say, because you're not like me, you're not in my so-called forced tribe, I'm not going to see humanity in you. I want you to suffer. I don't want anybody to suffer. I want justice for all is where I'm going with this.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that clarification. And I like the intelligent, the bandit, the unfortunate, and the stupid. And just a quick point on that, the unfortunate, in my critiques, and I have critiqued some pragmatic programs that were done in the name of DEI and being woke, where they were done horribly unskillfully. In other words, I agree with diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. I agree with the actual meaning of woke, meaning aware of social issues, awake to what's going on. You know that, and I'm not going to speak about intersectionality because that's a longer conversation. But I agree with Kimberly, Crenshaw's, original writing on that. But the unfortunate folks, those who have a good intention but do harm, that's my understanding. As you said that's what a lot of people, white, black, brown, etc., did in these DEI trainings. Now, it was a minority of people. It wasn't, 95% of the trainings went really well, but there were some people who made those in their trainings feel guilty, who shamed people. And that was the hook that allowed anti-DEI, anti-woke people to criticize the programs, because there were people who just should never have been in front of a room facilitating a DEI training anywhere, federal government, corporation, school, anything. And they did a lot of damage. But again, I'm making up a number. The vast majority of those programs were great and helped people. But there were some idiots. Oops, that slipped. There was some unskillful people who just they weren't qualified to train, to lead a group. So I like that unfortunate level, because it explains that, good intentions, but you're still doing harm. So.
Yeah, we've kind of gone over, because it's been a great conversation, especially, like I said, definitely a lot of energy and thoughts about what's going on. But as we bring our show to a close, any quick thoughts about what we can do to, keep our sanity and stay on the path of being fully human during these challenging times, I would say.
One thing not to do, one thing to try to do. So one thing not to do is don't just get caught up in the next bad thing that somebody says and constantly scroll, what do they call it? Doom scrolling. Turn your freaking phone off. In fact, there's one good way to do it if you're constantly looking what's going on. But stop doom scrolling. But the second one is the thing you can really do. And I'm going to just steal, a line from one of your favorite authors and books, the 4 Agreements. Be impeccable with, commit to being impeccable with your word. You're going to fail. I'm going to fail. You're going to fail. Everybody's going to fail sometimes. But don't state an opinion as though it's a fact. Right? Don't say something as though it's true if you know it's not true. Make sure that what you're saying will hold up in a scientific laboratory or in a court of law where truth really matters, or in a good journalistic interview, a real journalistic interview where getting to the truth is what matters. Court of law done at its best, a scientific lab at its best, journalism at its best. There are other places too, but be impeccable with your word. Don't write or say anything if it's a fact, if it's only your opinion, and learn what's true and what's not true. That's a start. Make your own world and your neighbor's world and your family's world a little bit saner that way. You're not going to change what's going on in the Capitol building or the White House. At least not this morning. Maybe by the evening news. But, so do something that you can do. Be impeccable with your word.
Absolutely. I agree with that wholeheartedly. And as we transition to the last, I would say, segment of our show, where we identify a person who we believe is shown the characteristics of being fully human. So we're not just talking about things that are just pie in the sky, but people who actually live this life or are currently living this life. And I'll go first and say that most, I believe, mothers who are actually doing the process of raising children. One of my favorite authors by the name of Dr. Ben Yochanan, he referred to the mother as being the closest thing to God that a child can experience based on the definition. And I kind of beat that up a little bit, but that's what he's alluding to, that if you look at the definition of what God is, your mother, if she's being a mother and giving that love and raising you properly, is that closest thing. And I know my mother fits that description for sure. Kindness, unselfishness. Again, women are not perfect. Mothers are not perfect. They're going to say things and make mistakes. But I never felt not loved. I never felt ignored. I never felt that there was no problem they couldn't solve. And I'm speaking about my mother, but I'm also speaking about other mothers and other women I've met who are mothers throughout my life that have had that impact over me, whether they were aunties, teachers, or just elders in the community, or just folks I've met later on in my life as an adult. And that woman just happened to be my mother's age and send that wisdom and, again, that nurturing care and just that emotional intelligence. And you recognize that it's like air. You don't recognize until it's gone. Then you realize, oh, I'm missing something here. Mm-hmm. And that's where I believe these times and the energy and the chaos is missing that woman's love and that touch. And we're seeing that dominant male, ego, narcissistic, alpha type mentality. So mothers, all mothers are who I want to lift up as being fully human, who are living that.
Yeah, beautiful. No matter who you are, no matter where you are, you had a mother.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I'm going to mention somebody who I don't know that much about, and because we don't really define what it means to be fully human, because that would limit the idea of being fully human. But last night I thought he showed his full humanity in Congress. Is Congressman Green from Texas. So in the first 2.5 or 3 minutes, he stood up. He has his hair. He has a beard. He has his hair pulled back. He has longish hair, and he yelled, at Donald Trump, and basically saying, I think what he was saying was, you don't have a mandate to stop Medicaid, and he kept repeating it. And he was warned. There's a formal warning they use in Congress about decorum. And Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, first asked him to sit down and be quiet, then read the formal warning twice. And then when Mr. Green didn't sit down, they removed him from the Congress. But he stood up with a sense of passion, truth, and knowledge when his own party had said, we're going to go and we're going to behave. He has a reputation for kind of bucking what he's told from what I read this morning. And I just admired that he did that, because I watched the first 25 minutes live last night. And I just said, there's the guy. Because I had written to my own Congress people, and other people had done the same thing, ask them to show up and just stand with your backs turned the whole time. Quiet, respectful demonstration of disagreement. 2 people ended up turning their backs after a while, but it was very disjointed. But he just followed his passion and was telling the truth. There was not a mandate to cut Medicaid. And he was escorted out of the house he works in for doing that. So for me, that's an example of being fully human. And so Representative, and the best thing is his name is Al Green, I'm pretty sure. So he reminds me of a musician. So,
Exactly. Well, again, thank you, Reggie, for being present, coming to the show, choosing a great topic, being fully human. Like I said, helping me see a label to that and a path and a journey to put myself on. And listening audience, thank you all for listening to us today, whether you're watching live or whether you're watching this as a replay. Hopefully you see the benefit of being a critical thinker and choosing a fully human identity. And it opens your eyes and your perspective and your heart to see the world in a whole different space. Because when you allow yourself to see who through the lens or identify yourself through the lens of what they told you who you are based off your race, your gender, your sexual orientation, your color, your skin, your political affiliation, and those other identities. If that's your dominant identity, you're always going to be at war. You're always going to see yourself as a victim, and you're always going to be able to be manipulated. So just keep that in mind. So until next week, next Wednesday at 10 a.m., let's all work towards continuing to being more fully human. Thank you.
Amen.